welcome everybody to season 4 of the Digital Dish. So I am excited to be here today, and I have a separate host, Kimberly Tobias. Lois is off doing family things. Kimberly, welcome.
Thank you, Jeanne. It's so nice to be here.
So today we're interviewing two really terrific women, and Kimberly, I think you know where we brought them from.
Yeah. So, given I've never met this audience officially, I'm Kimberly Tobias, and I run our Women in Digital program globally. It's my volunteer job, as I like to say. It's a passion of mine, and so I really enjoy doing the work. And we launched a Women in Digital Awards program last year in the Americas. And the two women that we're talking to today were winners from that program for this year. And so I'm really excited. They are advocates and movers and shakers in the industry. And so it's going to be a really great discussion.
Yeah. By the way, I call it my side hustle to run the Digital Dish podcast. So I'm with you on this one. So
That's
today
great.
we're going to talk to Melissa Rojo and Heather Bunyard. So if we want to bring them on and start the conversation with them.
Sounds great.
Hi, Mel. Hi, Heather. Welcome to the Digital Dish.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So first of all, we want to congratulate you again on your awards. Mel, you won Rising Star for Women in Digital, and Heather, you won for Advocacy, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So my first question, and you can go, Mel, let's start with you, because we've got a lot of different people here in terms of our career progress in from start to finish, kind of. Well, I'm not finished yet, but some people might say I am. Mel, talk to me about how you got involved in tech, and then Heather, I'll ask you the same question. Talk to me a little bit about how'd you got into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess this is for everyone who's not a technologist. Mm-hmm. I am actually a poli-sci major. But my love for technology started a long time ago. I am originally Colombian by birth, and I am first generation and the oldest. So for any immigrants listening to this, you know that the oldest child is almost like a third parent. Because your parents, and especially, back when I was growing up, the resources were very limited. So the ways, the things that you needed to know to apply for college, the things that you needed to know to book a doctor's appointment, all these things were definitely more of a word of mouth. The internet was just getting started. There wasn't a lot of resources out there. But the internet was starting to break some barriers on how do I get around my community? Simple as that. So from a very young age, when I was helping my parents basically translate legal documents, that's the joke in the immigrant community, when I was 9, I started to see technology as a resource to kind of, one, help my family navigate ourselves, but more to be connected with other people who knew how to do things. But I realized very quickly that, especially as technology then, it wasn't very user-friendly. It was something that you had to definitely spend your time understanding, trying to figure out how to make it work for you. And so from back in the day, and then, I started getting involved in high school. And then when I went to Princeton for college, that love for accessibility more than anything really grew. And so although I was convinced I was going to be a lawyer, I still kept up to speed on what technology was doing and how it was making resources more accessible to people. Thankfully, I got dissuaded from the lawyer path. No offense to any lawyers in the audience.
Everybody was going to sign up and take the LSAT test. Just so you know, I've done the same, and I got sick, so I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I think my creative brain needed an outlet. And essentially, I was kind of persuaded by some of my peers, say, hey, consider consulting, but in technology. Don't just leave people with a strategy, enable them to really move. And that mission in general moved me. And so I've been really lucky in my few companies that I've been part of to be given access to create and to shape real things that are helping a ton of people, whether it's in banking and healthcare and the government, right? Like all of these things that have real impact to people, and keeping that lens. So where I sit, I'm the US lead for our product innovation group for all of LTI Mindtree. And so at the forefront of what we're doing, we're not just trying to figure out how technology can just help because that's the new trend. No, we're trying to really figure out, hey, how are these people moving, connecting with each other? What are their problems that they're having? And then at the end, how can technology help them with that? So I think long-winded answer, but it's definitely something I've been passionate about for a while.
No, it's a great answer.
I've heard you use the term democratization.
Yes.
I love that. I thought that was a really good way to characterize it.
Absolutely. I think that's my love of poli-sci and my love of technology kind of combining, right?
Yeah.
And just how do you make things accessible, without using big and fancy words? How do you make all of us on the same playing field? Because we don't all come from higher education institutions, or we don't all have these great schools. Like, I think, not to get too much on the social side of things, but like the disparity of education starts as early as preschool. So keeping that in mind, and that's a big problem to solve. How do we use technology to kind of solve for those gaps and do what little we can?
Yeah. Heather, let's find out about you, because you come from a different end. You're kind of where I am, I think. And
Exactly.
how did we get into technology? Go ahead.
Yeah, I love hearing, well, it was hard to navigate technology, and clearly I'm a little bit older than you are. So I was, how I got into technology is in high school. I had a math professor that happened to be an adjunct professor. This is like over 30 years ago. He's an adjunct professor at Pitt, and he would teach computer programming at night. And my senior year of high school, he said, Heather, you have an aptitude for this. I'd like you to do, I don't have a computer class, but I'd like you to do an independent study with me and write some programs for the schools to calculate grades. I was like, okay. And so that's what I did my senior year. Unfortunately, I also had, he was a great advocate and mentor for technology, but I also had other people in my career that said, oh, technology, really? I don't know, maybe, why don't you go into business? And I thought, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Technology, I don't know. So I went into business. And so I started going through business school, and I'm getting into my senior year, and I realized that the type of roles that I'm interviewing for is mostly like retail management, hotel, restaurant management. That wasn't what I wanted to do. So I reached out to another mentor and I said, hey, you're in business, and I was thinking I wanted to be like a leader, a manager, an executive someday. And, we kind of chuckled. We said, well, in order to do those things, you have to know something. You have to do it really, really well. And then you can manage people doing that. And then your career progresses from there. And I said, well, I don't really know anything. I'm just a kid. And he said, well, what are you good at? And I'm like, well, I'm really good at computers, but I don't think I want to do that. And he didn't even know what this meant, but he said, well, if you're good at computers, you go out there and you do computers and you be the best computer person. Because, this is over 30 years ago. You be the best computer person you can, and then you manage other computer people. And I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I went back.
First of all, I gotta say, Heather, they must have, all the friends saying don't do computers must have taken the same coding class I took, where I was like, I'm not doing that. So I love that story.
I mean, that's the way it was back then. It was like, oh, that's, it's for guys. It's kind of, nerdy. I don't think so. So I got my first job as a software developer. Because my senior year, I started taking a lot of computer classes, and then I went back and got my master's in information systems, and really had a more proper education in technology. So that's how I got into technology, but really it wasn't my initial focus.
I love that story. I love that. Just like, I feel like the path has been something we've all kind of staggered along. It's serendipity, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think another important thing is, Heather, you talk about advocacy. And when you told me about the guy at Pitt who said, hey, why don't you do computers? And then somebody else said, oh, what do you want to do? Those mentors, those people that were advocates for you. And I know that's something you're really passionate about. Talk to me about how you see other women can take a role to help become advocates for women in the technical field.
So that's a great question, and advocacy is so important. And I just did a session. I work for Burlesoft, and I'm a customer success officer. So I travel a lot, and I spend a lot of time with our team. And I did a session on advocacy. And one of the things that we focused on in that conversation was advocating for yourself, and then advocating for others. And sometimes it's so hard for us to advocate for ourselves because it's uncomfortable. and you're taking a risk, you're bragging, maybe you feel like you're bragging about yourself, but it's way easier to advocate for others. And as leaders, we all have the responsibility to advocate for others, because it's way easier for us to say, you know, this individual is doing a good job. You know, they understand this technology very well. So that's the first thing I say is, you know, make sure that you advocate for others, especially if you're in a position to do that. And it doesn't have to be somebody that's more junior. It can be somebody who's a peer or somebody who's even more senior. You can advocate for people at all levels, and I think you should, because it makes the organization stronger. Also, when you're working with individuals, you know, I always advocate, guide, coach, you know, whatever you want to label it, is, you know, early career, stay more technical and make sure that you've got a good knowledge of your domain, and that you don't progress to leadership too fast, because you lose kind of, you know, what your expertise is and who you are in technology. And then I also encourage you, although I say stay technical, you know, make sure you understand the business you're working for, the industry that you're in. And, you know, I always kind of, you'll advocate to get involved in more technical things, advocate to understand what the business is, you know, take advantage of opportunities. Maybe they aren't directly related to what you do day to day, but it helps you understand what's going on. So those are some of the strategies that I encourage when I'm advocating for advocacy.
Heather, you know, I recall you talking about, you were talking to one of your mentors and talking about what's the most impactful thing that a woman can do, that you could do in your career. Do you recall what I'm referencing?
I do, yeah.
And I thought that was a great story, you know, that it is about advocating, right? Being a woman's advocate.
Yeah, and that the scenario that we're talking about is, I had a mentor that I worked with, and she asked me what I thought was the most important thing to a woman's career. And I said things like, you know, hard work and technical expertise and teamwork and, you know, delivery on time, meeting commitments. And she said all of those things are important, but she was really passionate about, you know, having an advocate is one of the most important things for you and your career success. So I thought that was an interesting early career experience, and, you know, advocacy continues to be a theme throughout my entire career.
Yeah. And Mel, you come from a different point of view here, and not only advocacy, but what do you see are roadblocks that you're seeing among your peers and in your environment?
Sure. That's a really loaded question, I think.
I know. Sorry.
No. Please. I love tough questions. I think it's a loaded question because I do believe we're all kind of doing, I don't want to say the best we can, because I think we can always be doing better, but I do think people believe that they're really conscientiously thinking about it on both sides of the aisle, right? The unfortunate truth, and that's the truth of any kind of like minority group, is that you need everyone on every side of the aisle to be advocating for it. It's not enough for women to be saying, hey, women need more space. Men who are in that position need to also be able to create that space. So, but I think the roadblock, I mean, there's a few different roadblocks. Number one, I think it's the ability to really make sure that we're integrating at every level. So I've noticed that, and I work for a very heavy company, I think we all do, with areas of diversity, but it's not necessarily horizontalized in the way that we really want to see it, and especially at every level. So although it's maybe they're top of mind in terms of efforts, I think a lot of the concentrated efforts are at the bottom. Hey, how can we get a ton of women or equal ratios at the bottom? And this goes for almost every single kind of diversity group that I think we're trying to kind of bring in, because it's easier. Oh, the entry level, you know, there's an enthusiasm. What I've seen become harder, and I'm not a mom, but I've seen it because within my team, I have a ton of moms. I think it becomes harder when women put on a different hat and then are asked to balance this crazy world of tech and consulting that we live in without very little support. So when I go and I look at why men are being maybe promoted to the levels above and women aren't, a lot of the situation, I don't think it's because, oh, we think men are better. Like, I don't think it's that. I think it's because take a look at the amount of hours, the amount of output. at face value instead of seeing, hey, how can we enable and how can we create a safe area for creation on both sides, keeping in mind that like our identities are a very important part of who we are. It's not just about being a technologist. It's about the way that, you know, we help our communities and the way that we're helping our families and all of that, and whatever role that may fit for you. And making sure that organizations are actually creating enablers to do that. I think that's a huge challenge. The other thing too is in the way that we create like personal relationships. So there's a saying, and people are, you know, agree or don't agree with it, but people do business with people that they like. And I think that people try to meet in the middle of converging areas of interest. And so sometimes, unfortunately, that will end up kind of creating some gender divides, right? So, hey, I'm really into the NFL and I love football. And maybe women as a whole aren't fully in it. Like I have my own fantasy league with my girlfriends. Like we love it, but I know that's not necessarily something that permeates. And then add non-American women and it's even less, right? And so for me, especially because I'm Latina, I always like to look at not just the women aspect of it, but like the diversity of a whole. How are we making sure that we're creating spaces, again, within work that allows us to connect on a personal level with our clients and with each other that doesn't not include these important groups? Because again, that's where the business is happening, whether it's the business getting promoted or the business with your clients, right? It's in these more personal levels. But I don't know, Heather, like I love your opinion on this because obviously like Jeanne mentioned, like I am kind of at a different conjecture and I'm observing it, looking up.
Right.
But
no, I love hearing you talk about this and having empathy and awareness for what working women are going through. Now, certainly working women that are mothers, and you certainly are closer to it than many other people, being the oldest in your family, and in many cases being a caregiver, it sounds like. I'm a mother of 3, so certainly understanding what that means to be a working mother and balance those things is really important. And I think everything you said, loved it. I thought it was right on. I would also add this dimension of risk taking because it's really scary to take some of these risks and as you know, and women often are a lot more calculated in the risks that they're going to take. And sometimes they say, you know what, I can't because of whatever their barrier is. And I encourage women to take risks. And I always use this analogy of rubber ball or glass ball. And so if you take a risk and something doesn't work out, is it a rubber ball and you drop it and it bounces back up and you carry on? Or is it a glass ball and you have like a really big problem? And sometimes there's things that really are a rubber ball and we're treating it like a glass ball. You know, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do that because, and the reality is you can. And, but you just have to kind of step back and look at what's going on. You know, for me, early in my career, I took a risk. I was asked, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and I was quite young. And they asked me, like, would you like to go to Singapore? And you're going to lead the IT team there in Singapore. And I was just a few years out of college. And I said, yeah, sure, of course. And he, like, before I even knew anything about it, because I knew that whatever was going on, this was going to be an opportunity of a lifetime, but super, super risky. And I went over there and I didn't fully understand what I was getting into. I was leading an IT team. I was being asked to do things that I had no experience doing. So it was a huge risk. Now, it worked out very well for me because I learned a lot really fast and I, you know, latched on to people that could help mentor me. But, you know, understanding as a woman, I encourage people, you know, really look at the risks and don't shy away from taking something and look at the reasons why you can say yes, rather than all the reasons that you shouldn't do it. And when people around, and I was fortunate enough because the people around me knew that I accepted this risk and I might not have been fully ready for it, so they helped me. And so when you see somebody around you accepting a risk, how do you help them and let them take on a risk in a safe environment?
For sure. And if I could add, so risky play is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And it's this idea, because I think a lot of the times we're talking to women who are already in their career and are trying to make momentous moves one way or the other, right? But the reality is there's all of these longitudinal studies that show that the risk aversion in women starts from as early as the days on the playground. So for people who are parents on both male and women, make sure that your girls are engaging in risky play. So they show, like you kind of see the way that girls play versus the way that boys play, pushing each other down, jumping off of things. But more importantly, you see the way that parents react to girls playing rough and to boys playing rough, right? And so we hear things growing up like, oh, that's just boys being boys and things like that. They show that parents who kind of are okay with their girl falling down and don't make a big fuss of it, or especially if there's a brother and a sister, they kind of treat them equitably on the playground, that those women are more likely to take risks. So then, stepping back, and that's why it's this big societal thing, right? It's not just about the women we work with. It's about the girls in your family. It's about maybe the young women that we do all these design thinking sessions for, like elementary school kids, to just show them how to, collaborate and creatively solve for problems. But it's the same thing. It's like all of these social impacts that we don't have to, it's not just about technology, so that when they get to being career women, they're okay and comfortable taking risks. But I love that rubber and glass ball analogy. I'm going to start using that.
My dad, whenever I would go to my dad and be like, oh no, I really just blew it. He'd be like, listen, he'd be like, visibility, good or bad, it's visibility. In 6 months' time, they will not remember what you did, but they will remember who you are. So don't worry about it. And I thought that was great advice. Whether he really believed it or not, it made me feel better.
I also think the idea of failure. I mean, sometimes you learn more from failing or falling down than, than doing everything perfectly. You don't learn anything from that. So I think you guys have been a great panel. I know we got to wrap it up because everybody's got things to do, but thank you so much. I wanted to end it on a positive note, and we hit that 100%. So thank you all so much for joining us, and hope to talk to you soon. All right, Kimberly, that was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I did too as well. It was really great to see them again.
I love the fact that we had Mel on one side and Heather on the other, and I think just brought some really good life to it when Mel's talking about how the internet was first and how she used that to break barriers. I loved how she talked about the democratizing, and I think that's all part of the discussion. I think it went on a lot during the pandemic, because a lot of people, like people who are disabled, who it's a challenge to get into work and be at a desk, whereas they could work from home and be perfectly. And I think different disabilities are actually, that's part of the democratization. And I love how that, unfortunately, it was the pandemic, but the good news is we got to the other side with a lot of people, and so that was pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And a lot of people who didn't have access to the internet, to technology, right now have it, because that's how the schools were teaching the kids. And that's been a wonderful, outcome from it. And I'm a big supporter of the democratization. I loved how she characterized that. Wonderful.
And I loved how Mel was so thoughtful about this bottom-up advocacy. And when she talks about moms, even though she wasn't a mom, she took care of kids and was a caretaker. It sounds to me like it was an availability issue. Like the men get promoted because of availability, but they're still men are our allies, and we all know that. But it's like, okay, but how do we make the availability work? And I think making spaces to include diversity was a really great conversation. Like, how do we do that? That's a harder nut to crack. And I think there's a whole thing coming up with apparently there's a crisis on the way for childcare. And so
well, Jeanne, like when I started my career, there just weren't that many women. And I think now we've had years of women being in technology that you can look up and you can see role models and you can see people. And our male colleagues have seen women who have been successful. So for them, it's not, where it used to be, there weren't any women and you didn't have those role models. You have those now. So, which I also think is really great. And I think this idea of women advocacy really has taken off, right? I think we make a concerted effort now to help the women that are around us, as opposed to viewing them as competition, right?
Right.
And I think that's been a great, advancement for women and for our networks, and also as an example for the younger women.
My favorite of all was the glass ball and the rubber ball.
That is
Wasn't
a great,
that a great
analogy.
idea? I can see it in my head. I'm like, because I drop things all the time. I dropped this glass, it's gonna shatter. If I drop the rubber ball, the dog will get it, no problem. So I love that. But the last thing was really, really, I think the most thoughtful thing that I think Heather brought up was risk. I don't know why, it just never occurred to me. But I did read a thing recently about a woman who's teaching girls to play poker because she's teaching them. She's like, this is how you succeed in business. You learn how to take risks in poker, and that leads to improving your ability to take risks. Isn't that great? I just thought it was a terrific idea. So I'm so glad Heather brought that up. But yeah.
And just the idea of how little, kids play, right? And the fact that boys take more risks and they start at a very young age. And I do believe that. I used to joke with my brother that, he would figure out the least amount of work that he had to do to get something done. And he mastered that skill. Where I was like, oh my God, I have to do everything because I have to make sure it's 100% right,
Right.
And that is a good skill to learn at a young age. So
yeah. So, well, anyway, we're missing Lois, who normally would be on this conversation, but I'm delighted to have done this with you, Kimberly, and hopefully you'll do more of these in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
And I'd love to.
Okay. And that's a wrap. Season 4 off and running.